And eventually money became less of a thing that gave me opportunities, and it became more of a burden than anything else. It starts off as this wonderful thing that provides opportunities. And quite easily it becomes an obsession. It becomes an obsession because what you have is only good for so long. You get a car, or you get a house, or you get a phone, or you get clothes or whatever, and you have it for a while, and you realize, well, this stuff's kind of old. It's kind of outdated. I need to upgrade. I need something else, and so you need to make more money to get it, and then you get those things, and you're like, well, maybe now that I've got these things, maybe I can upgrade a little bit further. And you go for it, and regardless of your actual income, you start wanting more. And this goes for somebody who's driving a 98 Corolla or somebody that's driving a brand new Mercedes. They always look around and they're always like, man, if I had just a little bit more money, I could upgrade my standard of living. I could get a few more channels. I could get a little bit bigger TV. I could get a little bit nicer couch. I could upgrade to leather. I could get another dog. I could get another cat. I could actually start feeding my cat food instead of just paper scraps that I've colored brown. Like, you start thinking about the things that you can upgrade. Regardless of how much money you're making, that always happens, and it becomes a bit of an obsession because you're never satisfied with what you have. And then it turns into this thing where it's just anxiety. And because there's not enough money. And again, regardless of how much money you have, this happens. Whether you're driving the 98 Corolla and you're always like, oh man, how am I going to pay for repairs? Or you're driving the brand new Mercedes and you're like, oh man, I don't know if I can afford the payments. Regardless of the situation you're in, this always happens. People in Hollywood, they look like they're living it up. They've got no worries at all. But they bought the houses that require them to maintain the same amount of income to be able to pay the property taxes. Not just to pay for the house, to pay the property taxes for the house. And so it becomes this anxiety thing. Regardless of your income, regardless of where you are on this economic chart, it becomes this source of, how do I pay for the bills? How do I deal with this credit card debt? How do I deal with this debt? How do I maintain this standard of living? What do I do? Where do I get the money to deal with this stuff? Oh, the gas has gone up. How do I? And all of a sudden, anxiety is the source. Yes, this money is the source of anxiety. And then it ends up being the source of arguments. And this can be either you're fighting with yourself, or you're fighting with your spouse, or you're fighting with family members. Even if you're not married and you don't have kids or whatever, but there's someone in your family or close relationships, you've probably had an argument about money. Who should make it, who can spend it, how you can spend it, when you should spend it, and you end up having these major arguments because it's an obsession and a source of anxiety, and now everyone's trying to figure out how to control it. And you see churches split up, you see families split up, you see friendships divided, you see businesses divided, all because they're arguing over money. And so this thing was a great object, a great opportunity provider, is now a source of loneliness and pain and frustration. Do you know why? Because you've made the mistake of thinking that it's your money. It's not your money. It's God's money. All of it. What you have in your possession is not yours. You simply have it in your possession. You have a limited window of control, but it's not yours. Now, let me give this to you from a philosophical perspective. The money that you have right now, somebody had it before you, didn't they? This is yes. I bet you, and probably in the next couple days, somebody will have it after you. If we want to expand our thinking a little bit further, before you were born, all the possessions, all the materials belonged to somebody else. Then you got it. What happens when you die? Somebody else gets it. You want a great example of this? Michael Jackson. Apparently, he's still putting out records. Who knew? Dead guys can put out new albums. I can guarantee you, he is not seeing a cent from any of the new albums. He's not making any money off of it. His talent, his resources, sure, not his. He's not getting paid for this stuff. Somebody else is. And so the money you have, you only have for a limited amount of time. You don't give it away to somebody and then say, well, I want that money back now. That's not how it works. You have resources, you have income, you have money, but only for a limited amount of time. It's not really yours. Then if you want to get into the biblical perspective, we see that in one of the minor prophets, Haggai, it says that all the silver is his and all the gold is his. You see in the book of John, it says that no one gets anything unless God provides it. And then you see Jesus in the book of Matthew make another point to that effect, saying that if you're going to be taken care of or fed, you're going to have clothes, a place to live, all your needs are going to be taken care of by God and God alone. Everything is God's. What you have is not yours. It's his. And Jesus made this very clear. When he was here, he spoke about this. He told several different parables, several different stories about it. At one point, he says, one who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. And one who is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you with true riches? And then we've got this big long story in the book of Matthew called the parable of the talents. Now, in your Bibles it says the parable of the talents, and it's not actually talking about like your ability to juggle 3 balls that are on fire without burning your skull. Like, he's not talking about those kind of talents. Talent would be a measure of money. And he tells this story. He says that there are 3 servants and a master. And the master says to his 3 servants, I'm going away for a while. And I'm giving one of you 1 pile of gold. I'm giving another one of you 2 piles of gold. And another one I'm giving 3 piles of gold. I'm going to go away. You take care of it for me. And then I'll be back to get it in a little while. So he goes away, and the guy with 3 bags of gold, he goes and he invests it. He uses it in a way that will gain more money. He buys some seed, he plants it, he gets a harvest. He ends up with 6 bags of gold. The guy with 2 bags of gold, he's got it, he goes and invests it. He goes buys some cows, and then they start having more cows, and he ends up with 4 bags of gold. The guy with 1 bag of gold looks at it and says, well, I don't know what to do with this. So he hides it. The master comes back and he says, all right, guys, what did you do with my money? The guy with 6 bags of gold is like, I invested it, doubled your investment. He's like, good job. Then the other guy comes and he says, I invested your 2 bags, here are 4 bags. He's like, excellent. And the guy with one bag comes, he says, "Here's your one bag of gold." And the master's like, "Seriously? I gave you a whole bag of gold and you didn't do anything with it?" Then he fires him, he kicks him out, he has him tortured and gives the one bag of gold to one of his other servants. Jesus' point was, what you have is not your own, and you shouldn't use it like it's your own. Peter makes this comment. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Use it as good stewards. Now, what's a steward? What's stewardship mean? Stewardship is when you are responsible for something that's not yours. For example, if you send your kids to school, the teacher is a steward of your kids. They are not her kids, but she is responsible for them for a time. If you go to the dentist, if you go to the dentist is a steward of your teeth. You are putting them in his hands, literally, and hoping that he doesn't chip the back of a tooth while he's removing a wisdom tooth, because that would never happen. And you're trusting him that he would take care of your teeth. They're not his teeth, but he's responsible for them for a limited amount of time. If you go into the hospital and you have a nurse and patients, the patients do not belong to the nurse, but the nurse is responsible to take care of the patients for a time. She is a steward of the patients. She needs to take care of them in such a way that they actually don't die and come out better than when they went in. That's what stewardship is. And so when we look at the situation, what Jesus is getting at is that we have been given resources to use for a limited amount of time that are not ours, that benefit the one they actually belong to. If you were to send your kids to school and they were to come back dumber, is your teacher a good steward? If you go to the hospital and your nurse actually makes you worse, are they a good steward? If you go to the dentist and he breaks your teeth, good steward? No. God gives you resources, gives you money, and you waste it, good steward? No. The thing with stewardship is, what you have is not your own, but you are responsible for it. And so if that's the situation we're in with this money thing, the reality of the situation is what we do with our money should be determined by what God wants done with the money. Okay, you don't go to the dentist and say, "Dentist, do whatever you want with my teeth. Have at it." And the dentist doesn't do whatever he wants. It is his responsibility to do what is best for the teeth for you. The teacher doesn't get to do whatever he or she wants. He has a responsibility to do whatever the parents and the system requires. And so when it comes to what we have in our lives, all of our money, it has to be used in a way that matches what God wants done with it, because it's not your money, it's God's money. And so there are 5 basic things you need to be a good steward of your resources, of your money. The first one is budget. You need the budget. Well, Pastor Evan, where does it say you need a budget in the Bible? I'm glad you asked. Does anyone remember the story of Joseph and Pharaoh? The story of Joseph and Pharaoh is Joseph, by a series of unfortunate events, ends up in Egypt. He interprets a dream for the king, and the king ends up putting him in charge to make sure everybody doesn't starve. And so the dream said that for 7 years they were going to have good crops, and then 7 years afterwards they were going to have absolutely no crops. And so he said, Joseph, you need to prepare the kingdom to survive this ordeal. So what does he do? He creates a budget. He sets aside, you can use this much to survive on, and this much we're going to set aside for when we need it later. This much we're going to use for these sources here, and this much we're going to set away for these next 7 years. And then when those next 7 years come by, we have this much that needs to be used here, and this much that can be sold. And they create a budget. It's a guidance system for your resources. So the first thing you need to do is budget. How do you budget? Well, then you've got these next 4 pieces. The first one of these is get out of debt. Now, where does it say in the Bible, get out of debt? Well, it doesn't say in the Bible, get out of debt, but it does say in Proverbs 22, it says that the person that borrows money is a slave to the lender. The person that borrows money is a slave to the lender. So if I borrow money from someone here, you basically have control of me because I owe you something. It restricts what I'm able to do with the resources God has given me because I am constantly burdened by the fact that I am a slave to somebody else. And so if you've got debt, and most of us do, I've got student loans, some of you have mortgages, some of you have debt in other areas, other places, that needs to be a priority. You might not be able to get out of it tomorrow, but you need to set aside in your budget a way to get out of it as soon as possible. Because as long as you're in debt, you're a slave to someone else. And that restricts what God is able to do with you and the resources He's given you. Okay? The third thing you need to do is save. Save. Now, Jesus tells a story. He's not actually talking about money in this story, but he tells a story about how it's just common sense for someone when they were to go and build a tower, they check to see how much money they have before they start building it. He says that's just common sense. Now, he was making another point of that with that illustration, but Jesus assumed that it made sense to think long term. Not just what can I buy tomorrow, what can I buy right now, but what am I going to do long term in the future, and how do I make sure I have the resources to do that? And that's the point of saving. Saving isn't just a matter of I need to hoard up money for myself so I can do whatever I want. It's a matter of thinking long term. If this is the end goal, how do I meet it? Well, I need to budget, I need to save so much, put so much aside to make sure that when I get to the point where I need to build this tower, I need to send my kid to school, I need to replace my car, I need to do whatever I need to do. I need to go over to Africa to save starving children. Whatever it is you're doing, you have the resources to do it. And so you need to save to think long term. Next, you need to spend. And we need to spend money. Even if you're completely self-sufficient, you're off the grid, you've got solar panels, you make a garden, all this stuff, you're probably going to end up having to repair your solar panels. You're probably going to end up having to buy seeds. And you're probably going to end up having to buy a winter coat or a car unless you build your own car, which would be super cool. Not sure if anyone here does that, though. If you do, let me know, because that would be really cool. You need to spend your money. But Jesus also talked about that. Jesus said that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. He says, don't lay up treasures for yourself on earth, but lay up treasures for yourself in heaven. And if you really think about that, he's talking about investments. He's saying, what you do with your life, make sure that it pays off for what really matters. What you do with your time, what you do with your effort, what you do with your money, you need to think of it not as what can I get here, but what is it, or how can I use it as an investment for something that's worthwhile. And so you need to look at your spending not as what can I get, but as an investment. Okay? Can you go out and buy 6 cups of coffee a day? Sure. Is that a good investment? Not for what you're looking for. Nope. Is it going to pay off well? Nope. Bad investment? Don't put your money into it. Is sponsoring a child over in Africa so that they get an education, is that a worthwhile investment? Does it long term? Does it have positive consequences here and in the future? Does it affect their eternity? Absolutely. Good investment? Spend. Do you eat junk food? Junk food might be cheap, but if you're spending your money as an investment, you should probably put in the best food you can, because that's going to have the longest, best effect so that you can be of the most good for the longest period of time. Good investment or junk food? Bad investment. And so you need to look at all your spending as investments, good and bad, and ones that are built just for what we get here, or things that pay out in heaven. Things that actually have a lasting impact. And the last thing you need to do is give. And giving is something that happens between you and God. Paul makes the statement in one of his letters to the Corinthians. He says that everyone should be a cheerful giver, to give according to what God has led them to. Jesus tells a story about how one day he was at the temple and he was watching people give, and there were these people that were giving huge, massive sums of money that were hardly anything when it was the percentage of what they actually had. And he saw this little old widow bring over and put in 2 pennies, and that's basically all she had. And he says she gave more than anybody else because she put everything she had. She gave everything she had to the work of God. In the book of Acts, it talks about how the church get together, and whenever there was a need, they gave. And if they had to sell land or sell something in order to fill that need, they did it so that they would fill the need. Giving is something that is between you and God. Now, giving to other people, giving to meet specific needs, giving to sponsor kids, giving to make a difference in your school or your community, giving to your church and handing it back over to God, all that is between you and God. And you've got to figure that out between you and Him. Paul says God doesn't like it when people just feel guilty and give. He wants people to be cheerful and do it out of trust and obedience. And so you need to spend time in prayer asking God, what is it that you want me to give? And the reality is, it's not your money. So giving it away shouldn't be that big of a deal. Using it as an investment shouldn't be that big of a deal. Creating a budget for it shouldn't be that big of a deal because it's not your money, it's somebody else's money, and you're supposed to take care of it. And so if you're going to be able to be a good steward of your money, you need to spend time in prayer asking God, how do you want me to spend my money? How do you want me to save my money? How do you want me to budget? What do you want me to give? And you need to be getting in the Word so you know what it is that He values and what would be a worthwhile investment for His mission. Because what you have isn't yours. It's His. And I found that when I actually remember that, a lot of the arguments and the anxiety and the obsession kind of goes away. Because it's not what I can get or need to get, or even the limitation of what I can provide. This is God's money. And He will provide. I just got to use it the way He wants me to use it. And He'll take care of all the other details. And so when it comes to money, we need to remember what you have is not yours. It's God's. Budget, get out of debt, save, invest, /spend, and give. And be a good steward. Because it's not yours, it's His.